Welcome to another episode of The Brand Called You, a podcast and podcast show that brings you leadership lessons, knowledge, experience, and wisdom from thousands of successful individuals from around the world. I'm your host, Ashutosh Garg, and today I'm delighted to welcome a very senior and accomplished professional from Cote d'Ivoire, talking to us today from Dubai, UAE, Mr. Carl Manlan. Carl, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ashutosh.
Carl is an author of a book titled I Can Breathe. He has been recognized for impactful initiatives in Africa and globally. His experience includes strategic roles at AUDA NEPAD, the Economic Commission for Africa, the Global Fund, and the UNDP. So, Carl, my first question for you. Your work is anchored in the belief that real change happens when innovation meets purpose. How did this philosophy develop for you?
It was very early in my career. I was very fortunate to work at the Global Fund. And when I joined, it was about the transition from chloroquine to a combination therapy to treat malaria.
Yeah.
So the innovation was available.
Hmm.
It created a new treatment, but it wasn't accessible to everybody
Hmm.
because there were many steps, including the costs, but the policies around changing treatment guidelines and so on. So that to me became really that understanding that you can have a burst transformative solution, but they have to find a way to the people that they need to serve. And if that purpose doesn't exist, then your innovation really may not be actually an innovation.
Well said. But many leaders use the word purpose. What differentiates genuine purpose driven action from rhetoric?
So first, we need to acknowledge that purpose costs something.
Mm-hmm.
You need to have trade-offs, not just adding elements to a PR strategy, but really understand that it's going to be a cost and you be willing to do that. The second one, you need to measure it in the type of lives that have been changed. You can think of financial inclusion and so on, but the life of the people that you're trying to support have to change. The third one is about accountability on both sides, not just for the person that is creating, but also for the person that is actually on the other end, whose life is being changed. If we bring these elements together, then we really have the opportunity to meet that purpose, thinking about strengthening the foundation of a pyramid. I like to call it foundation, not base. Because really, it is the foundation of the economic system that we have. And that's when we have, that purpose has moved from just a mission statement to an operating model.
Correct. What do you believe is the greatest barrier preventing organizations from aligning innovation with purpose?
It's the fact that we often think of short-term solutions, and we have the challenge of not always being very proximate to the issues that we're trying to solve. And we have many organizations that are thinking about quarterly reports, they're thinking about grant cycle, and human life doesn't revolve around grant cycle, around fiscal years. It's beyond those elements. So we need to make sure that the innovation team really comes as close as possible to the reality, listens, understands. And, if you never had the anxiety of seeing that harvest that is coming, but you don't have a means to get it to the market, it's very hard to replicate it.
Correct.
So often the barrier for me sits within the architecture and how we recognize, we create the right incentives, and we position ourselves in relation to the communities that we're trying to uplift.
Amazing. Carl, you worked across institutions shaping financial inclusion. Where have you seen innovation most effectively unlock opportunity for underserved communities?
It might sound cliche, but the reality is that mobile money in East Africa remains the defining example.
The M-Pesa, you say?
M-Pesa, and it's not because of the technology itself. It's because it was built with a deep understanding of the informal economies that needed it the most.
Absolutely.
So M-Pesa was built on the trust, accessibility, and the cultural context.
Correct.
It wasn't about the transactions.
Yeah.
It was about mimicking the behavior that already existed. And how do you do that? An example closer to home in West Africa is agency banking, where suddenly the regulators in Ghana and many other countries realized that all these small businesses that are selling those cards for people to get the credit on their phones, or the hairdresser and so on, can be used as a not brick and mortar typical bank, but can be used for access financial services. And that is really an interesting one, because suddenly you look at this pattern and you say, the innovation here worked when it met people's reality and not really conforming to legacy system that existed. And I think that's where the change comes. Legacy systems are great, but they serve a different purpose.
And therefore, a follow-up question is, what is the missing ingredient in many financial inclusion strategies today?
I would say financial health, and that's my bias, having started, and you also spend time in the health sector. We can't just look at the people transacting, because that's just an element. Health is a critical component, because we still know that a lot of people spend a good part of disposable income. When I was in that sector, we talked about 75% of disposable income that goes into, how do we make sure that less of the disposable income goes into health? And because the person is healthier. So I think that, to me, is a piece that is missing. We've looked at it from the transaction, the bank accounts. And if you think about India in 2016 with the demonetization, we realized that it wasn't about the bank accounts. But how do you make sure that people's behavior has evolved to make sure that inclusion is a means to economic dignity? It's not the end in itself.
Well said. Small businesses and entrepreneurs are critical drivers of growth.
Absolutely.
What innovation has most impacted their ability to thrive across Africa?
I would say interoperable payment systems and embedded finance. So I like a tailor in Lagos, does very nice work for me. And I always struggle to make sure that I can pay him, because I don't live in Lagos. I don't have a Lagos financial system that I can use outside. So I always have to find a friend that is going to make the payment, and so on and so forth. If we can unlock that opportunity, so that this tailor in Lagos can serve clients across the African continent, and not just the 300 million Nigerians that live in Nigeria, but across the 1.4 billion on the continent, maybe beyond. That in itself is innovation that will make our small businesses really get to where they need to get to. And of course, the second piece will be around logistics. We can't ignore the fact that you need to be able to move your goods, and not just sort of that. But interoperable payment system and embedded finance are critical.
Said. Transformation requires ecosystem building. What are some of the essential elements of a thriving development ecosystem?
I would say 5 of them. The first one, public, private, and civil society. That's where the magic happens. That intersection, and you need to get everyone in the same direction. We may not agree, but we need to be able to write down our disagreement, but move forward in the same direction. The second is infrastructure, both the physical infrastructure and the institutional. So, of course, I mean by that, the roads. You can think of the rule of law, but also you can think about the invisible infrastructure of payments. How do you get this sort of money to be moved to? The third one is patient catalytic capital, because risk needs to be absorbed. And if we don't have that ability to absorb risk, it becomes a problem, because you cannot innovate. You just go by default on your legacy system.
Correct.
The fourth one, is around knowledge circulation. We generate a lot of knowledge, but it's not equally distributed. It's not equally understood. It's not equally contextualized. And if we can get to that place, I think we'll be in a much better position. The fifth and last one is psychological safety, because we need to be able to be safe in failing, in learning, and doing some iterations. If we don't have that last element, it means that all we're doing, we are being risk averse, because we are not have that space to be able to breathe the changes that are required. And then we're just going to be doing incremental things. And then we'll just be comfortable with incremental and legacy systems.
Absolutely. What a great response. Thank you.
Thank you.
Carl, where have you seen the greatest disconnect between policy ambition and ground reality?
It's in the capacity, the implementation capacity and the changes in the political economy that we see. By the time you're writing your proposal and trying to implement, yes, that's what things change. Leadership may change. So you have this national financial strategy that is brilliant on paper.
Yeah.
And then, the intention is correct.
Hmm.
But then you not necessarily have, let's say, the central bank that has the resources to actually do the monitoring. If we go back to our earlier example, the central bank in East Africa looked at this innovation and say, you know what, we're going to allow this to happen. And then we'll sort of make sure that we understand, we follow, we guide. And we need more of these regulators in place.
Right.
That is really key. And then we understand that in any case, there'll always be entrenched interest. And how do we engage with this entrenched interest to understand that what they may lose will not be that significant? So they have to be part of this reform and allow that change to happen. We cannot ignore them because it's not a static exercise.
Right.
You sort of get to a place where you need to recognize that you have to create coalitions that are going to sustain the reform through political cycles. Because the reality is that often president will change every 4 or 5 years or every 10 years. How do we make sure that the system understand that this is not about the president that left and the administration that left, but it's about the country?
Correct. What does it take to scale a development initiative sustainably beyond donor timelines? And I've seen this many times when I was in the Gavi board.
Yeah. I think we are not very good at human beings at building institution that we going to see the end of it. The OECD is the extension of the Marshall Plan.
Yeah.
So as human beings, we don't necessarily like to close things. It sort of, it has to continue. So can we build in those systems, basically financial sustainability from day one, and the sunset clause from day one, and say to ourselves, you know what? In this period of time, this is what we can achieve.
Right.
So when the Gates Foundation says, this is what I'm going to have as a sunset clause, it sends a very powerful signal.
Right.
That this is what we're able to do to bring the world to a certain place. And maybe somebody else will follow. So your time at Gavi, my time at the Global Fund, we always ask that question: what capabilities must exist locally?
Correct.
For this to continue after the Global Fund or Gavi leaves?
Correct.
So in a way, designing your own obsolescence in the process is the key to sustainability.
Absolutely. The day we all start designing our own obsolescence, the world will be very different, isn't it? But moving on, Carl, you've served across institutions like the UN, the Global Fund, Visa, and EcoBank. What patterns have you observed in how innovation succeeds or fails inside large organizations?
It's a good one. And I think it has to come from senior leadership.
Yeah.
Because senior leadership is the one that will protect innovation from what I'll call, given that we speak about health, corporate antibodies. And they provide dedicated resources to make sure that this innovation delivers and is not competing with core business for attention. So you need to have some resources.
Yeah.
And you also need to give this team of people a permission to operate with different rules than the parent organization. So once you have that, you more or less have, in a good place. Then failures, I think you have that, you have pilots that never scale because some people see that the existing revenue streams are going to be challenged. So they're not interested. Or the innovation happens somewhere else and is completely disconnected from distribution and implementation capacity of the organization. And then the third one, you have brilliant innovation, technically, but people are completely naive about the internal politics and the incentive structures. So on that journey that I've been on, one of the key learnings for me is that innovation would die not from bad ideas, but from organizations that are immune to responses. Very nice idea, but you know what? Let's continue what we've been doing. We're making enough money.
Correct. My next question is, technology is accelerating change. How do we ensure it remains inclusive in the development in the developmental world?
So do you use a technology called tap to pay?
Mm-hmm.
The beauty about tap to pay, and I'm not sure if the designer thought about it, someone in a wheelchair suddenly has access to financial services.
Yeah.
Someone that is visually impaired can use that same technology. They don't necessarily have to rely on somebody to go and give them cards for them to sort of withdraw cash and so on and so forth. So we need to get to a place where the design embeds these elements of inclusion with the people that are supposed to be supported. And at all costs, we need to avoid retrofitting. Because the retrofitting means that you're trying now to find a solution for something that was not thought about. And then, of course, always, what is the accountability mechanism?
Yeah.
That you have a technology that is going to create or perpetuate exclusion. Do we press the green button to say, go ahead, we'll still make the money, and then we'll figure out later with some PR and so on and so forth. So it's really, to me, the question isn't whether technology can be inclusive. It's whether we are willing to make the choices to ensure that it is inclusive.
And do you believe innovation can be taught, or is it cultivated through the mindset and our context?
I don't think it's a skill. You can teach design thinking, system thinking, and all these sort of things. But innovation emerged from a mindset and your curiosity.
Right.
You really have to be curious about this existing solution that we have. How do we create something where people that were not consuming are going to find a way to be consumers? And that's where your innovation is going to come. We can take, when people like Mo Ibrahim decided to launch mobile money on the African continent. For many people, they looked at him probably thinking, okay, they can't even have a fixed line. But he saw a market and the innovation to make sure that individuals have access created all the application that we see forward for these 1.4 billion people on the continent.
Correct.
So you have to be able to see it and be probably the crazy one in the room that says, you know what? I see it, I feel it, I don't have everything in place, but I'm sure I can get to it.
Very interesting. You often speak of inclusive economies. What is the role of values-based leadership in shaping such economies?
I think it's a simple difference between those that like to extract, so extractive growth, and those that really thinking about inclusive prosperity. You can say it's the same analogy between the fight against poverty and enabling prosperity.
Correct.
It's a completely different mindset. It's a completely different energy that you have when you're talking about enabling prosperity. So you need to be able to shape culture, because culture will shape economic outcome. So let's say you value equity. It means that the system that you designed is going to be distributing broadly. If you say you value sustainability, it means that you're going to be thinking about long-term creation. So it's that tension between the short-term and the long-term value creation. And being able to say, you know what? My children will see it. When I was living in Addis Ababa, there's a taxi driver that would take me to the office every day. And one day he said to me, you know what? I will not be rich, but my children will be rich.
Right.
He was willing to basically invest so that the next generation is in a better place.
Absolutely.
And that's the difference. And this guy, today, I'm still in touch with him, even though I left more than 10 years. He was a sort of earlier version of Uber in Addis.
Wow.
He has created a dispatch of drivers that you can just call him and someone will be there for you.
Wow.
So he created opportunities for others.
Correct.
And that's the kind of leadership that we want to be able to see.
Very well said. I have time for two more questions for you, Carl.
Oh.
If you could reinvent how development actors think about innovation, what would you change first?
I would change the way we define problems and the way we design solutions. And I think that's where the tension has been, because you often have people with good intention that may not necessarily lived with a problem that exists.
Hmm.
And then you have people with a lived experience that are not able to sort of create or actually not recognizing the solution that they've had in place.
Hmm.
So across the African continent, you have Susu, Pamoja, Tontine, women coming together to save money. This is probably the first form of insurance,
Hmm.
but it has never been recognized as an insurance model.
Hmm.
Therefore, we have new, better technologies.
Correct.
But these women already created a system that worked for them.
Correct.
And we need to get to this place where we really, really look at what already exists, because human beings have an incredible ability to innovate, to change their lives, and then take it from there. So that to me is really changing that.
Very interesting. And my last question for you, what message would you offer emerging leaders who aspire to drive change where innovation meets purpose?
Number one, get closer.
Yeah.
Spend time to see, feel, smell, sense, because that proximity is going to shape your perspective. And once you have your perspective with shaped with human values, human data, smell, senses, this will affect the way you shape the impact.
Correct.
The second one, you have to learn to be impatient with injustice and patient with process. Because if you rush the process, you may not fully understand what the injustice has been and what change you want to make, because it will take longer. And I think that is the second piece. The third one is that you need to anchor your work in values. And you have to remain flexible on the methodology that you apply. If you take these three, I think that's the kind of thought leader that the world needs, that have more clarity. Methodology is there, but you are humble. You know what you stand for. At the same time, you're curious about how to get there. And that's where you sort of see innovation meeting purpose. And that's really what I've tried my journey to be, looking for that spot.
Very interesting. And on that note, Carl, I just want to say what a fascinating conversation this has been. I think we covered some amazing thoughts from you on innovation, on purpose, on development, on inclusion, and how so many of the countries in our world can really benefit from the impact a lot of our institutions are beginning to make under, hopefully, purposeful leadership. Thank you for speaking to me, and good luck to you.
Ashutosh, thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.